Good afternoon and welcome to our session, Investing in Middle Neighborhoods, Building Social and Racial Equity Through Housing, brought to you by NeighborWorks America. My name is Racquel Reddie, and I am the Managing Director of Community Development for the National Community Stabilization Trust, or NCST, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator today. Before we get started, there are a few quick housekeeping tips that we wanted to let everybody know about. Everyone, as you join, you will be muted upon entry, but you will have the ability to unmute yourself. We just ask that you keep yourself muted just to avoid any additional feedback during the presentation. Use of your camera is definitely up to you, but we are aware if it's a big crowd, we might not see everyone. We have also enabled the chat feature, which will come in handy towards the end of the presentation to see your questions. And if you do want to see the chat throughout the session, we recommend that you exit the full screen mode. Of course, have something to write with. We want you to be engaged and write down questions and or notes that you find helpful. Be respectful for everyone on the call. And that's just, according to the community guidelines link that we've been following throughout the forum. We are going to be recording the session, so you will be able to see this on the website as well later on. I'll be handling the Q&A throughout our session today, but I do ask that you keep your questions until the end when we open it up for general questions and answers. With that, today we'll be talking about strong, stable middle neighborhoods and how they offer a high quality of life, affordable housing, and access to opportunity for households of color. The National Community Stabilization Trust and NeighborWorks America will address strategies for improving middle neighborhoods and introduce the Middle Neighborhoods Community of Practice, which is an informal, facilitated network of practitioners, researchers, and policymakers working to strengthen these communities. Now, I'd like to take a couple minutes just to introduce our speakers. First up is my colleague, David Sanchez, who is the Director of Research and Policy at NCST. David is responsible for initiatives that support neighborhood stabilization and the rehabilitation of distressed properties. David coordinates the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative, which marshals support and attention to reverse the decline of middle and working class neighborhoods around the country. He also leads NCST's research projects, which utilizes NCST's proprietary database on distressed property renovations and sales. Next, we have Marcia Nedland. Marcia is a consultant focusing on market rebuilding strategies and evaluation for neighborhoods and small cities. Through her consulting business, Fall Creek Consultants, Marcia works with neighborhood associations, nonprofits, foundations, financial institutions, and local governments throughout the U.S. Marcia is also a member of the National Middle Neighborhood Steering Committee. She also coordinates the Community of Practice, which you'll hear more about, and contributed a chapter on place branding in the book On the Edge, America's Middle Neighborhoods. We also have, as far as part of our panel today, Mr. Ernest Coney, who serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the CDC of Tampa. He has over 15 years of executive management level experience in providing health, social, and economic programs to benefit low to moderate income persons and the elderly. Ernest, most recently under his leadership through the CDC, has created Tampa Vocational Institute, TVI, to address the disproportionate rates of unemployment and underemployment in urban neighborhoods. TVI has increased CDC's ability to address the growing skills gap and corporate training needs for local area businesses and individuals. And with that, I would like to go ahead and show you a little bit of our agenda for today. We will be providing a general overview of middle neighborhoods. We will be also sharing with you some information about Black middle neighborhoods. We have a fun break where we'll have an interactive map for you to kind of play around with and get used to seeing your particular geographic area. We'll follow that with a general panel discussion that I'll help to moderate, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers from the audience with a final wrap up. With that, I'd like to introduce again David Sanchez and Marcia Nedland to give us a general overview of middle neighborhoods.
Excellent. Well, Thanks so much, Racquel, and thanks to all of you for joining us here today. Here in Washington D.C., it is a pretty fall day before a lot of days of rain and cold are coming. So I wish we had been able to gather in Daytona Beach. But thank you to all of you for making the time out of your busy working at home schedules or whatever they are to be here with us today. And we're really excited to talk to you about the work that we're doing with middle neighborhoods and how how we think it might be applicable in Florida, and to learn and to hear what you guys think about it. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what middle neighborhoods are and why we care about them. So I think what it's useful when you think of the idea of what's a middle neighborhood, to think about the neighborhoods in your region across, like either a spectrum or a continuum, and middle neighborhoods are that category of neighborhoods that are, they're not at the bottom of a spectrum in terms of neighborhood health. They're not our most distressed neighborhoods. They're not our most disinvested neighborhoods, but they're also not neighborhoods that are clearly thriving. They're not what we might call communities of opportunity. They're not places where there's concentrated advantage or wealth. These are neighborhoods, many of which were built decades ago, that were long home to working and middle class communities, and they've provided an affordable place for these households to live their lives and raise their family, and participate in their regional economy. In some regions, we see middle neighborhoods might just be staying in the middle. Maybe the middle class labor market is healthy enough, or maybe the balance of housing supply and demand is where it is, where middle neighborhoods are doing relatively well. But I would say that's not what we see in most regions. I'd say in most regions, we either see middle neighborhoods pushing down towards distress and decline, or in some regions, and I think this might be the case in certain Florida metropolitan regions, we're starting to see house prices elevate and displacement start to be an issue. So at the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative, what do? We started the initiative. It was a couple of years ago. It was a community of community development practitioners who were working in these neighborhoods across the country, and there was a sense that there was a common theme that brought them all together, and they came together to explore it. And we've been churning out analysis and research for the past few years to understand the dynamics that are in play in middle neighborhoods, and also we call attention to these middle neighborhoods. We think that unfortunately, middle neighborhoods are a part of the neighborhood spectrum or the community development sphere that don't get probably the same level of attention as we might see for attention paid to other neighborhoods. And then another thing that we do in the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative is we work to empower those who are either stabilizing or improving middle neighborhoods and communities across the country. And we do that through research, and we do that through networking, and we do that through learning. I think next I'm gonna turn it over to my partner, Marcia Nedland, for a second to talk a little bit about what we're seeing on the ground in middle neighborhoods across the country.
Thank you, David. So I do want to draw a line under what David said about gentrification and the risk of it. Most of our membership started out in the Northeast, and I think that that's a reason why most of our community practice membership thus far has not seen escalating prices as a problem. It's more of the lack of value in neighborhoods that's a problem. But I think as we expand south and west, we're starting to see that. And I think that Ernest is going to give us an example of that when he talks about his Tampa neighborhoods. But so what raised the concern about middle neighborhoods? A bunch of us started noticing that we used to think of middle neighborhoods as something that, if you thought about them at all, that they were just sort of on autopilot, and they could, if somebody died or moved out, there would be another replacement household to buy their home and carry on. But we're seeing that they're faltering in that sustainability. And specifically, we mean, being able to reliably attract replacement owner occupants and other neighborhood friendly buyers, like the best of the landlord investors, their ability to generate home values that actually support quality maintenance, repairs, and updates without running into appraisal gaps. And I'm sure there have to be many of you on this call that understand the appraisal gap problem. How do you maintain this stock and update it so it's still an asset, both to the owners and to the community when there are appraisal gaps? The ability to repel the worst investors, that's used to be, you could pretty much count on, if there were any investors, they were well-known, part of the community and responsible. And that's one of the things that when we start to dig into data about middle neighborhoods, we start to see them creeping in. And the more values drop, the more likely that is to happen. Faltering in their ability to maintain engaged residents that are taking stewardship of the neighborhood. That's kind of has been a hallmark of middle neighborhoods. And the more that change happens and that, households turnover, the harder it is to keep that population of residents engaged and knitted together like a safety network for the neighborhood. And finally, and it's, I think, a big piece of what we're talking about today, they're faltering in their sustainability and their ability to deliver home equity to owners and revenue to municipal government. So, this is where the American dream happens, basically, is in middle neighborhoods, or where it's supposed to happen. It's the place that people long to move up to buy a home in, to invest in, and to own a piece of the American economy. And that is something that's really important to protect in all middle neighborhoods as we see incomes starting to cluster at the top and the bottom. And I think especially for Black neighborhoods, it's something that we care deeply about and that this country owes a lot to protect and to try and regain that stability and that ability to invest in a home and create intergenerational wealth.
So, Marcia touched a lot on this, but when we talk about why middle neighborhoods matter, it is things like home equity, and it is things like the fiscal health of cities. I think in kind of a broader frame, I'd say what we're talking about is maintaining safe and affordable communities that provide access to opportunity. And I think that at least the way that we think about it at NCST, that's the ultimate goal that we need to be working towards, whether we are dealing with neighborhoods that are facing growth or whether we're dealing with middle neighborhoods that are facing decline. That's why we got involved with the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative. I think many people think of NCST as, the primary thing that we do is we facilitate real estate transactions of distressed properties, but as we're doing that work, we're increasingly seeing the way that home renovation and rehab strategies intersect with really what is a broader mission about and broader questions about what are our communities going to look like, where are we going to invest resources, and ultimately where does the future of our metropolitan regions lie. There's one last point that I want to hit on this slide. I would say one other compelling reason for focusing on middle neighborhoods is it's a little bit of a cost. A little bit of a dollar of prevention or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I'd say that for the most part, the interventions we're talking about in middle neighborhoods, while not free, are lower cost alternatives to fixing problems in neighborhoods once they decline, or in trying to ensure that low and moderate income households can access communities opportunity once they have gentrified. So that's just a bit of the lens that we bring to this work. Moving forward, to give you guys just a little bit of information of how the initiative is structured, the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative kind of falls into two parts. The first part is a national steering committee, and that is what we at NCST coordinate. That is where we bring together prominent practitioners, as well as researchers, foundations, financial institutions who are interested in this work to do research, to do policy analysis, and to develop communications and advocacy focusing on the importance of middle neighborhoods. The second component, which I'll turn to Marcia to talk to, is our community of practice.
Yeah, and I think Racquel mentioned earlier that, this is all of the practitioners plus some of the policy makers and researchers who want to be involved in what we're doing. We sort of lightly facilitate this whole national network. We have about 350 people in it right now across the country. But as I said, not enough in the South and the West yet. So we want you to all join. And it's supported by NeighborWorks America and staffed by a small team of organizers, of which I am one. So I think we have maybe one more slide about this. Yeah, so again, just we're connecting practitioners to each other. We want to facilitate peer-to-peer learning and technical assistance opportunities, hopefully someday funding and new policy initiatives. There's a lot going on with the community of practice, and to join it, you just need to go to middleneighborhoods.org, and at the bottom of any page, you can sign up either to only receive our newsletter or to also become a member of the community of practice. We'll talk about a few more ways to get involved towards the end of our presentation.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Marcia. And I think after today's presentation, Florida is definitely going to be in the house and representing the region. So our next topic is Black middle neighborhoods, and Ernest Coney will be walking us through those. So here's to you, Ernest.
Thanks, Racquel. So as we get ready to present here, we really want to start with the origins of these Black middle neighborhoods. And of course, we all know that it normally started out of one or two conditions, either one, out of segregation and those type of tools that really prevented Blacks from moving into certain areas, or it was also because of opportunity. So as we begin to think about the Great Migration and the second Great Migration, where 5 million Blacks begin to move into manufacturing jobs, becoming police officers, teachers, other professional jobs in these urban cores, it also created opportunities for folks to live together as well. So as we have this, we also think about, these Black neighborhoods also have this unique feel in a lot of these areas as well. So when we think about these distinct neighborhoods, oftentimes you think about the schools that were created there, the churches, dance teams like Alvin Ailey in New York. Even in Tampa, Florida, Chubby Checker created the twist, the dance, the twist here in Tampa, Florida. And we all know, of course, Chicago is famous for its Chicago stepping dance style. So these neighborhoods had a very distinct kind of organization and culture to them. So as we begin to think about that, really coming through that Great Migration and the second Great Migration, and we think about, some of the older communities having more of a poor housing conditions, and then the removal of certain barriers, redlining, fair housing, those kind of things really begin to create opportunity. So Black home ownership really grew, as you can see, between the 70s up to the 80s, almost reaching 50%. Next slide. But then something happened, of course, in the 90s, right? So we had some changes. Of course, the crack epidemic really took place in a lot of urban cores. But these are some of the reasons that the demand in these markets really began to dwindle. Expectations of equity. When you buy that home, you don't think you're going to be able to get the same price or more. Difficulty accessing capital. If you can imagine in some of these markets, there may be small dollar loans, a $65,000 loan, and a lot of banks may not want to get engaged with that. And we kind of talked about obsolete housing stock. So these communities had older homes as well. And then you start getting into perceptions of public safety and the school systems and the quality of schools. And then we also have, the thought process, the implicit bias, kind of, if you will. So as people begin to think about, these are truly predominantly Black neighborhoods, oftentimes non-Black buyers felt that these neighborhoods were invisible to them. They didn't even give it a second thought or even thought about going into it. So these are some of the factors that kind of presented why there was low demand. Next slide. So I'm going to walk with you a couple of quick examples in Tampa, Florida. So Carver City and Lincoln Gardens is an area here in Tampa. It's about 76% minority, and this development really took place between the late 50s and early 60s. It was really designed as an option for veterans coming back from World War II to come to be able to reside and own their own homes. So that's what it was really marketed as. So as you can see, it's very close to downtown. A lot of redevelopment is starting to happen. And you can see from the 2006 to where we currently are in 2018, a shift begin to happen. Household incomes have gone up a lot. The number of households have increased. The number of rental units are staggering. And then as the median gross rent is starting to change. So just to give you a little flavor of that, if you go to the next slide, we can show you some of the pictures of what's taking place. So the first picture is a picture of a home up to your top, and it's a home that sells easily for $350,000 in this neighborhood. Below that is the picture of some of the housing stocks that's in that neighborhood. So slightly older, of course, because they were built in the 50s and 60s. And then on the top, you also see the pictures of the multifamily units that are really beginning to populate and really expand. And now Carver City is being heralded as like the third best neighborhood to live in Tampa, the fourth best place for young professionals to reside. So these neighborhoods begin to take on a different feel as folks begin to move in. Next slide. Belmont Heights in East Tampa is a slightly different look at a neighborhood. This neighborhood had traditionally stronger home ownership. It originally had multifamily units that were built as the original housing projects, if you will, but they've been converted. That's Belmont Heights, and they built 860 new units. But when we really look at the difference, now Belmont Heights is an area where it's surrounded by historic neighborhoods, and now that's starting to grow into this neighborhood. So even though it's taken a little bit longer, you see the household incomes are still flatter and the gross rents haven't risen as much. Next slide. The housing market is really getting ready to take off here. So on the top screen, you see two yellow houses that are under construction. Those will sell for $300,000. Right next to it is a small greenhouse where someone actually lives there. So now you're getting into urban pioneer concepts, if you will. Down below, you see the blue house, which sells for $275,000 next to the yellow house, which is a historic neighbor. And then the next picture over, you see the white house with the brick veneer with the yellow home right next to it. So again, a lot of urban pioneering type of activities beginning to take place. So as we begin to think about, what can we really do to help with these policies and these issues? In Florida, we have Save Our Homes, which caps the property values that being taxed to 3% each year. Over the past couple of years, that's been ranging from like 1% to 2% increase only. Down payment assistance allows for folks to really stay engaged and stay in those neighborhoods. Also, we have owner-occupied programs to make sure that the folks who own those homes don't get displaced as well. And then you start thinking about the transformation of the communities, where schools have magnet programs to make them more attractive as well as the commercial corridor improvements. So before you would find a lot of Burger Kings and McDonald's, now you're starting to see a lot of family-owned restaurants. So those are the kind of things that really begin to shift that narrative.
Great. Ernest, thank you so much. I think your presentation really gives folks a background here, at least for one of the major MSAs in Florida, what middle neighborhoods have looked like and what they'll begin to look like going forward. So thank you. This section is really a fun way of looking at Florida middle neighborhoods through maps. And there are about 3 maps that I'd like to share with you, and then invite David Sanchez to talk a little bit more about the middle neighborhoods mapping tool. If you'll go to the next slide. And as you look at this does demonstrate the middle neighborhoods overlays, if you will, in the Jacksonville MSA for all. So for all of you from the Jacksonville area of the state, some of this might look familiar to you, even though it's a little tiny here. But What we've tried to show in the shading is where census tracts show or demonstrate the median incomes between 80 to 120% of the area median income limits. Those are the areas that are highlighted. And that little area at the bottom of the slide to the left tells us, like, we're, for Jacksonville MSA, the household median income is almost $59,000. What we also did here was show you, if you were to look at just the city itself, median incomes are closer to 53,000, so a little bit less than at the MSA level. Next slide. And for folks that are from the South Florida market, you'll see here in Miami that what we've done is show you a screenshot of the Miami MSA by household income again, median household income again. You'll see here at the MSA level, the income's $54,239. If you look at, and that's what's represented here, if you look at the city median income, I think this shows the largest disparity between all three areas that we'll see. And the city median income is $36,638. Again, a pretty large disparity between incomes at a city level versus a regional level like the MSA. And then the last map here is about on the Orlando. It'll show the Orlando breakdown for the MSA. And so for those of you in Central Florida that are familiar with Orlando or Kissimmee and Sanford, we've noted here that the median household income is just over 55,000. And the city median income is just, well, quite below at $48,511. So with that, this is just sort of more of a teaser to get you started for our break, which is going to be a little bit of an interactive session. And I'd like to go ahead and bring back David Sanchez to help us with our, go back a few.
Yeah, absolutely. If you could just go,
there
we go. The maps that Racquel was just showing you are screen captures from a tool that NCST is going to be releasing later this month, but we thought we'd take a risk and make it available to you guys during your break for you guys to go in and play around with. And so what this tool is, I encourage you to click on the link and start to familiarize yourself with the layout. But this tool is a nationwide map of census tracts where you can apply a series of different definitions of what a middle income, or by proxy a middle neighborhood is, all across the country. If you go to the map, you'll see in the middle the map defaults to Cleveland. So you're going to want to go to the bottom left-hand corner is a list of all of the metropolitan areas in America. So, go there, pick your Tampa, pick your Miami, pick your Orlando, pick whatever you'd like. We encourage you to use your region, but there's no reason you have to. I'll put a few other instructions in the chat box. I'll say, so there are 7 different definitions of middle neighborhoods that you can use. The default one on the map is the one that was displayed in Racquel's maps, and that is 80 to 120% of the metropolitan region incomes. Depending on the region that you're working in, we'd encourage you to pay close attention to city incomes compared to regional incomes. And there's also an option to look at national median incomes. You play with the tool, think about whether you want to look at lower income or higher income middle neighborhoods, think about whether you want to be basing those standards based on either the city that you live in or the overall region that you live in. And we would invite you to enter any observations about what you're seeing in the chat box. I do think we're going to step away and take a break for a minute or two. Also, please note any observations that you have about how the tool works in your neighborhood, and we'd be happy to talk about them during the Q&A. So with that in mind, I hope everyone has a moment to go play with the map, and I hope that all of you playing with the map does not crash the development version of the map. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And in terms of time, we're about 1 minute to 2 minutes for folks to get in there and start playing around with it. And as you do that, we'll gear up for our panel discussion that I'll moderate with everyone that you've been introduced to so far. So we'll just give you another minute, and then we'll start with the panel discussion. Right. I should have had some mapping music.
It would have been a good idea.
All right. Well,
Oh, yeah, I think I noticed, this is Marcia, that, it was slow to load. So I think so I got out. Too many of us were trying to load at the same time. People are having trouble getting it to load.
Okay.
yeah, if you're seeing the chat too, Marcia, I think that's the two
Yeah.
comments that I've seen so far have to deal with the loading.
Okay, so I apologize there for that. I think what we'll do is then when the map is released in about a week and a half or 2 weeks, we'll be sure to send the link out to everyone who was on this webinar. And I apologize the map isn't functioning with this many users now. We'll take that back to the developer and we'll get the link out to you guys when it works when we have 1 or 2 people in there. But I apologize that it's not working for you guys today. So maybe we should move on to the Q&A then, Racquel?
Yeah, let's do that. I just want to say it out loud. I know you can see it, but it is middleneighborhoods.ariomatch.com. So if you want to make a note about that, you can certainly try this after the presentation today. So thank you. What we're going to do now is go into a little bit of a Q&A with our panel, and we are going to put this slide up for you just to start thinking about what we've shared with you today. It's not going to represent some of the questions that I'll have for our panelists, but this is just where we'll stop in the presentation to have this section. So I'm going to start off first with Ernest, and this is a question for you, Ernest, and I think it has to go back to something you mentioned in your presentation regarding equity. And so we do know that there's this real concern over the equity erosion occurring in Black communities. I wanted to see if you could share with our audience what your thoughts are on this and how can Black households overcome this reality, and certainly tying this into any sort of data sets that you're seeing through HMDA or otherwise for certain areas or certain communities.
Yeah, so each neighborhood may be slightly different, but overall, there's a common theme of a lot of value being left on the table, if you will. So a lot of these neighborhoods, when folks come in to do, the pricing or the evaluations of the properties, the appraisals, they come in a lot lower versus what counterparts or the same house, a couple of blocks over would be valued at. So there's a system kind of bias kind of opportunity that we can evaluate as well going on there. When we look at the HMDA data, there's also something else that we need to dig into a little bit deeper. Overall, the number of mortgages that are being originated by Blacks is a lot lower than their counterparts. So traditionally, the HMDA data shows that only 3 to 10% of the number of people originating loans is that much lower than their counterparts. And then secondly, they're getting denied at a much higher rate, 2 to 3 times the denial rates as well. So Racquel, you're on mute right now.
Sorry, I was just saying, one, thank you very much, Ernest, for that. And I was sort of tying in your comments to what I know will be a national source of data coming out of NAREB regarding Black homeownership rates. And that should be coming out pretty soon. So stay tuned for those that are on the call with us to look for that. All right, the next question is going to David Sanchez. So David, what do you think has contributed the most to the disparity between white and Black middle neighborhoods?
Thanks, Racquel. I think I'm going to cheat a little bit and provide perhaps 2 answers rather than just 1 answer. And the 2 answers are sufficiently of different flavor that hopefully it'll be useful. I think the first is, it's a big topic, and obviously it goes beyond the conversation we're having today about Black middle neighborhoods. And I think it is, in many ways, it is the way that access to opportunity and access to economic prosperity has been like systematically restricted for households of color in America. And it's a big problem that goes far beyond just housing. And I think it's a conversation that I've been encouraged to see our country encouraging, increasingly having this summer in the aftermath of George Floyd. And I think it is a long-standing issue that we will continue to grapple with, probably for decades. But I think that I'd say hopefully we're starting to see the beginnings of a political movement that would be willing to make the tough choices that are necessary to really ensure that households who live in Black middle neighborhoods can have equal access to the middle class and to opportunity in America. The second answer is much more concrete and much more, I'd say, more of a core middle neighborhoods issue, which is we simply see that demand for housing in Black middle neighborhoods is significantly lower than for housing in other middle neighborhoods, and especially in white middle neighborhoods. And the literature has shown two really interesting things that I think are relevant here. The first is that when white homebuyers begin their home searches, they predominantly think or want to buy in neighborhoods with people who look like them. So, if they're ethnically diverse, there tend to be neighborhoods that still have a sizable component of white households. Black home buyers, on the other hand, tend to look at almost all neighborhoods when they begin their home searches. There's a second trend I want to mention. This has been documented more in legacy cities, so I don't know if we've seen this to the same extent in Florida, but we see it in places like Detroit and Cleveland and Youngstown, is that increasingly Black households are declining to buy in Black middle neighborhoods and are increasingly also shifting their demand to the suburbs. I would say that together these trends point to a lot of why the work about building housing markets and neighborhood branding can go a long way in kind of restoring balances of housing supply and demand, and could be a strong strategy to try to stabilize middle neighborhoods facing decline.
Thank you, David, for that. And I do see the questions coming in. We'll get to those in just a few more minutes, so bear with us. Marcia, this question is going to be for you. With your background in marketing, what type of place-based branding strategies do you feel help to increase new homebuyer demand for legacy city middle neighborhoods? And I guess as a follow-up to that, so you get a twofer. As a follow-up to that, when you think about wealth building in middle neighborhoods, what specific things help to increase wealth in these communities?
Yeah, so those two things are tied together, I think. And I do a lot of branding strategies with middle neighborhoods, and basically any promotion of the neighborhood is a good start, because these neighborhoods have been, as I mentioned earlier, sort of on autopilot, and it isn't working anymore. So deciding that you're going to actually take control of your brand and manage it is a good thing to start with. And it's pretty simple, really. What I do with neighbors in their neighborhoods is I talk to them a lot, and we look at market analysis together, and we think about who are the target markets that they're after, who are the people who are most likely to appreciate the kind of neighborhood that they have and to be in the same price range as that neighborhood. And we think about what are the things that target market wants most in a home in a neighborhood. And then we sort of switch gears and think about what are the things that we think are the strongest selling points for our neighborhood, the things that we really love about it and why we chose to live here. And then we look for matches across those two groups of things. And what we try to come up with is 3 or 4 things that we call core brand attributes it doesn't describe everything that's great about the neighborhood, but it's the 3 things that we love and that we think our target markets will love too. And then we just get organized around promoting those 3 things. And our ultimate goal is to get realtors and home buyers that when they think of this neighborhood, they think of those 3 things. And we, shape all of our communication about it, around it. The other, though, thing that you can't fix by just having a marketing message is the housing stock and whether it's, living up to today's home buyers' demands. And one of the things we often notice, I always look at what are the bed bath configurations and how do prices, price ranges track with investor purchase. And there's just some things that need to be updated. People don't want to buy a house with one bathroom anymore. They just don't. They have to have 1.5 or 2. And if we examine the values, we usually can add those improvements and stay within the price. And then, updated kitchens and baths, all of that stuff. So it's a lot about looking at what is the competition for this neighborhood, what are people choosing instead, and starting to update the housing stock, which provides wealth building opportunities for the households living there now. And it also inoculates that property when it goes up for sale the next time against an investor purchase and starts to build some real value for it over the long term.
Well, thank you so much. It's a great segue into my question for Ernest. And Ernest, looking at your CDC's role in real estate development, how does the scope and cost of rehab change when you're looking at homes in legacy middle neighborhoods? So what type of repairs are consistently showing up when you're doing your due diligence? If you could share your thoughts on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so because most of these neighborhoods are slightly older, so I kind of showed you in Tampa, most of these homes were built between the 1930s to late 60s. So oftentimes, one of the very first things you have to do is go in and do the roofing and look at the roof. Oftentimes, you may have to look at major systems as well, right? So if you're looking at HVAC, you may look at upgrading electrical, those kind of things. So the challenge sometimes, like right in the current environment that we're in right now, is that a lot of banks aren't doing rehab type loans. So that's the challenge. So before, this was a huge market for people to go in and get that, that rehab loan and, buy something very cheap and then fix it up. At least in Florida and Tampa, the markets have definitely changed. I know in some of the other Midwest places, Detroit, you might be able to still get a great value in a suburb where they may have shut things down. So it's still maybe an option for other communities. But because the housing stock is older, you normally have to look at the major systems first. And of course, the roof is something that's definitely, that has to be done.
Thank you, Ernest. I think those were all great points. And it made me think about even some research that we've been doing on purchase rehab mortgages. And to the extent that folks will feel comfortable when you can't see like the GTV version of the after, but seeing that vision as it's going on to be able to want to do a purchase rehab, I think is something that we've been paying a little bit more attention to because of the tightening of the supply. Well, with that, I've got one more question. I think we can get this in for the panel before we open it up for some larger Q&A. And Ernest, this kind of goes back to you and a little bit of me. We know that on the other side of stagnant home prices is the issue of gentrification in middle neighborhoods. I think we saw a little bit of that even in Carver. What public and private partnerships have helped to keep homeowners in their homes while home values increase? And I know you mentioned the Save Our Homes legislation. Are there other things that you can think of to share with us?
Yeah, definitely. So, the CDC is a comprehensive community development corporation. So we partner with our municipalities as well as the private sector. So one of the very first things we want to do is not lose any more homes. So oftentimes when the grandmother passes, the heir of that property there wasn't a will. So, we partner with Bay Area Legal, which is kind of our free legal aid type organization, to make sure that families create wills so that they don't lose that property going forward. There's also, taking folks who are living in these communities already, who are renters, and just making sure that they have, understanding credit and improving their credit and making sure that they have access to these banks and down payment assistance programs so that they don't get displaced, right? They grew up in these neighborhoods. Now they have an opportunity to reside in these neighborhoods as well. And then, of course, we have groups that do owner-occupied rehab. So again, really our elderly, we don't want them displaced, but then, there may be someone who you lived there a long time, but you just need, a fresh coat of paint and it can make your house pop and add value to that neighborhood or to that block. So owner-occupied rehab is something that we also do, and we partner with a lot of other agencies that do that as well.
Thank you, Ernest. And I'll just add to that from a public, funding and subsidy perspective, and maybe other ideas around how to help. There's some cities around the country that do provide tax breaks or tax abatement to help with, keeping things affordable. There in Atlanta, I remember seeing this, that there was a moratorium on new construction permits. So when you think about middle neighborhoods, and maybe some have a lot of vacant abandoned properties too that ultimately get demolished, and you see more and more activity from an infill perspective, that's one way to sort of control. And I think one of your pictures showed it, the $300,000 house next to, the smaller house that had been there a while. A couple other things, and you mentioned it already, the forgivable loans. So again, this partnership with some cities, especially where they're providing assistance to owner-occupied households. And sometimes that can be quite a bit. I mean, for example, some are up to $60,000. And of course you have to qualify for this, but you have to also ensure that the rehab or the repairs get done as well. So those are just some examples to share with folks, to have you start thinking about your own communities and how you've seen some stabilization around affordability to avoid that gentrification issue. I think right now we're at time where we can start to open up some questions from the audience. I'm going to go into the chat and see what we have so far. And if you could, when you're putting in your question, just let us know maybe where you're from and if you'd like a specific person on the panel to answer it. Okay, we've got one from Monique. This question is, what are the panelists' thoughts on the prevalence of out-of-town investors purchasing property and or land in middle income neighborhoods? And there's a little summary of that after. There's one other thing to add. Real estate investors are land banking in middle income communities, making it harder for low and moderate income to enter the market. I think all of you could answer this, but let's see who wants to take the first stab at that question.
Well, I'd love for Ernest to add his local perspective. I would say at a national level, this is related to a lot of the policy work that NCST does in terms of disposition policy. So this is more about, it's partially about land, but it's also about land with houses on them. We are an advocate, we both run first look programs where community-based buyers have a first opportunity to purchase foreclosed homes before they're listed on the open market. And we advocate for their expansion across, different channels that are government supported. So, FHA, Fannie, Freddie, things like that. I would say that these sorts of tools are really important ways to ensure that both homes and land can get into the hands of responsible actors. A lot of the work that we do is facilitating the transfer of these properties to rehabbers, but we also facilitate the transfer of properties to land banks and really mission motivated actors who are doing a similar sort of thing to the speculators that you refer to, but of course more in line with the community development and really social equity goals that we try to place front and center when we think about community development.
Yeah, so I think, I definitely agree. And even coming out of the Great Recession, we really quickly realized how prevalent and how big this problem was. And in Florida, we tried to create a public-private partnership where a lot of these investors came, and the state actually put out a program to help these investors to buy this inventory. I think organizations like NCST would have been a better partner, because what we found out happening was that these organizations did not help those renters to become homeowners. They kept them as rentals in these communities, and we all know how that impacts our communities versus homeownership. So those are the real things. Airbnb now is also another issue that we have to fight against, especially in these growing urban communities where places that you wouldn't even think they would have an Airbnb now. People are coming to Miami, Tampa, Orlando to compete against hotels and live in neighborhoods.
Thank you for that perspective. Ernest. I'm just looking at time, and there are a couple comments in the chat that I'll share with folks. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to give us one or two more questions. But I do want to just mention, and this is from Rachel. She said, my sister, so her sister had to sort of move an hour away to find an affordable home, and moved away from where their home was in a middle income neighborhood in the Pine Hills, Rosemont area of Central in Orlando, Florida. So this kind of goes back to something, I don't know if we necessarily talked about it here, but we have been talking about it more in general. And that's sort of how middle neighborhoods are either the proximity of middle neighborhoods to either jobs or transportation hubs, and how that intersects with affordability. And, you know, time is money too, and people are having to, people used to have to commute a lot longer if you're not having to work from home. So it made me think of that. Another comment here, and this goes back to what we were talking about from a purchase rehab perspective. This is from Monique. Mass Housing has looked at the use of purchase rehab loans in the greater Boston area. The acquisition price in the region is already at the top of most moderate income buyers, what they can afford. So for first-time home buyers, she also mentions that they're ill-equipped to manage the rehab of a property with support from a qualified partner. And that's something we've been, like I said, been looking at, because we do have a network of what we call buyers who are affordable housing developers, and how they can play a larger role in bringing peace of mind to the rehab getting done the right way. We've got one more question here that's coming in. Oh, okay. All right. Do you have specific recommendations for CDC building new housing in middle neighborhoods? Should they be adding density, land trust, et cetera, to support the long-term affordability of middle neighborhoods?
I'll jump in there real quick, Racquel, if that's okay for
Yes,
you.
please.
I think it's a really, really great question, Lisa, and I'm really glad that you brought it up. I would say it's absolutely critical when thinking about what housing strategy to implement in a middle neighborhood. I'd say it's worth the upfront investment in data collection and in analysis to figure out what are the market trends that are happening in your middle neighborhood. I would say, you know, from conversations we've been having with Ernest and conversations Racquel's been facilitating between the middle neighborhoods movement and practitioners across Florida, we are seeing a lot more pressures towards gentrification, displacement, a lot of scarcity of land and scarcity of properties, and mismatched housing and supply demand, probably at a metropolitan region. I would say in places like that, the strategies that you reference, land trust, density, inclusionary zoning, are exactly the sort of strategies that we at NCST think are appropriate. I would say if you are not working in a middle neighborhood where gentrification and displacement are the threats, I would say that's probably not where you want to be building a community land trust.
Thank you, David. I'm going to have to stop right there just to finish us off. So at this point, and I do see another question come in. If we have time, we will try to answer that or get you in touch with Ernest. But for right now, let's go ahead and move to the next slide, and I'll invite Marcia back to close us out with the community of practice. One back.
Yeah, there you go. So again, just go to middleneighborhoods.org, sign up at least for our newsletter, but we would love to have you as a member of our community of practice, because we need everybody's brains on this topic in order to actually make some progress moving forward. You can also participate in our listserv, Middle Neighborhoods COP, at googlegroups.com. Watch we have monthly webinars. They're really cool. The next ones we're planning, actually, besides we are going to unveil the mapping tool later this month with David, but then we're planning a two-parter on updating housing stock to appeal to today's home buyers. So the first part will be like, how do you figure out what updates to make and what's your sort of infrastructure for doing that? And the second one will be about financing those improvements. And I think some of those questions in the chat are about that. So check our website, and you'll be able to keep up with our webinars. give us ideas if you want to propose a webinar, if you want us to deliver Middle Neighborhoods 101 webinar to a group of your CDCs and local governments and developers, or any combination of people in your community. We're happy to do that. Give us ideas for other stuff that we should be writing up and exploring. And you know, always just reach out to me with any ideas or whatever you're working on. I'd love to know about it.
Thank you, Marcia, for that. And thanks for the information. At this point, I'd just like to thank you all as panelists, and obviously thank all those that attended the session today. We hope that you got one new thing out of the presentation, and we really invite you to go back to the NCEDA main page. Our presentation and materials will be there for you. This last slide just shows a little bit of contact information for each of us here, and we'd be happy to continue the conversation. And remember, try to get to your next session, log in a little bit early for that, and thank you all for joining today. It's been a pleasure.
Nice job.